Okay, so this is the last part of chapter 1, and I know there's a lot in chapter 1. That's kind of the nature of the beast with novels, is that a lot is packed into that first chapter. If you think about it plot-wise, you know, this is the exposition, so the background information is being set. So there's a lot to take in because Fitzgerald wants your pathway, your walking in the shoes of Nick Carraway, to be a rich experience. And so you need the background information Nick Carraway has in order for you to see the world through his eyes. And that will become more metaphorical in a moment. So if you're not ready for some deep stuff, step away from the video now because we're about to get super deep. So we were talking about the idea of capitalism and incentivizing and understanding that world through that lens. So we're going to talk about the color symbolism. On the very last page of chapter 1, we have this paragraph in which Nick Carraway has come home, which you already know because you listened to the audiobook and you read the book, right? So Nick comes home and he sees Gatsby and he remembers the conversation with Daisy and he's like, oh, I should go introduce myself. You know, we're neighbors. I should go say hey to him. And he sees Gatsby, but he doesn't want to disturb him. So the paragraph goes, I decided to call out to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, meaning Jordan, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arm toward the dark water in a curious way, and, far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling, so he's like desperate. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been at the end of the dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. So Gatsby, who is, you know, obviously the person that the book is named after, but Gatsby is standing at the end of this dock and he's reaching out and he's trying to grab onto something. But the thing that he is trying to grab onto, Nick Carraway describes as a green light. And that's absolutely essential because you cannot hold on to light. That is the argument in this book. And that is that unattainable, whatever the green light stands for you. The green light could be progress. The green light could be greed. The green light could be a love that is not pure enough and never can never be perfect, can never be Instagram perfect. That perfection, and he calls it the Platonic conception, that perception of what that is just not attainable because it's light. And the reason that color symbolism becomes so important in this novel, you know, we talk about color symbolism, white equals purity and yellow equals tainted purity, green equals progress and greed and desire and all of those things, red equals passion. And the reason that becomes important is that, you know, Descartes very famously said that our knowledge of the world is limited by our experiences of it. The number one sense that we use to understand the world around us is the sense of sight, right? And, you know, when you're gaining consciousness in the morning, when you're waking up in the morning, the first thing that you do to remove yourself from your sleep state is to open your eyes. And the way that you understand the world around you is to see things, but your seeing of things actually has to do with light. So light comes in, bounces off an object and comes back to your eye. And the amount of time that it takes for the light to go from the object to your eye tells you what color the light is. So we've got certain cones and rods in our eyes that decipher that wave pattern as certain things. Like the praying mantis shrimp, for example, has more cones and rods in its eyes, so it actually sees more colors. And there's even a theory, there's like a philosophy of color, if you will, that talks about the fact that maybe our eyes have developed over time. If you look at old literature, you know, like you think of the Odyssey, it doesn't actually use the color blue. Old literature never has the color blue. So the question then becomes, have our eyes developed the understanding of the color blue and like we've evolved, or do we just not have a word for it? So like, you know, in old literature, like the Odyssey, he described the wine dark sea, but he doesn't say blue. He never talks about blue. So maybe it was blue, we didn't have a word for it, or maybe it just wasn't blue at the time. Maybe it was just, you know, but we'll never know, right? So there's a problem with language, and there's a problem with color, and there's a problem with understanding the world around us. The reason that it's important, though, is there's this whole aspect of time, right? So when we see an object, if you see a prism, for example, light goes through the prism and then it shines a reflection, a rainbow on the wall. And we all know the Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. That Roy G. Biv is actually the slowing of light. So the faster, the shorter, the longer, the slower. And that's how long the light takes to go from the prism to our eye. That's also the way that we understand the world around us, is through the construct of color. Well, just like that idea of color exists in our mind, so does our idea of what is either moral, or what is success, or what it is that we think that we should want in this world. It is the way that we understand the world around us. It is our lens. And what Gatsby is grasping for, this platonic conception that he can never actually get, is the point of Fitzgerald's argument. So it's interesting that we end on this note at the very beginning of the novel of Gatsby reaching out in this symbolic gesture that he so desperately wants that he's literally trembling for it, right? He's reaching out in desperation for whatever is at the end of that dock, but that green line is supposed to symbolize whatever it is that you... Hang on. Okay, sorry. My son, my cat, Ozzy, was trying to break into the office. So what if this dream that we're telling people is actually never truly attainable? You know, I pick on the Kardashians a lot because I think that they are kind of a marker for capitalism gone awry. You know, they're not bad people. I'm sure that they're very, very nice, but there is a, how do I put this? There is an aura surrounding them, right? That we put people like that on this pedestal of, look at them, they're famous, they can do whatever they want, so on and so forth. But even they, I think that if you question them, even they would probably say that they're not always happy, right? That you know, their idea of success is never actually attained because they still want more. And so too, you know, if you make a lot of money, in the end, it's still never enough. You always want more and more and more. And that is the boom that Fitzgerald was watching, was this idea of the economy being flooded with money, but it seemed as though there was no real morality tied to it. You know, if all you do and all you want is just to be richer and richer and richer and richer, it never stops. Like, your desire, your hunger for that never stops. And that ultimately is what the green light is supposed to represent. It's this idea of moving forward towards some unattainable goal, some unattainable level of success that never actually is graspable. And if it's never actually graspable, then why are we doing it in the first place? Now, what should be happening right now is you should be sort of rebelling against this idea and saying, you know, Kohanam, this feels kind of icky. This feels kind of like socialism. And that's valid. That's a valid argument to make, is that this book is very, you know, critical of capitalism. And so if you are like, I don't agree with that, argue against it. Like, absolutely argue against it. Have that debate with these ideas, because that's the goal, again, of literature. The goal of literature is to present an argument to you, a theme argument to you, so that you can either agree with it or disagree with it, or come up with your own version of it and say some of this is right and some of this is wrong. Because the beauty of a novel is that it doesn't come out and say, here is my one sentence argument, here's my 15-second TikTok, and then you can go, yes, no, whatever, and move on. Instead, it makes you walk down a pathway. It takes you through a journey. It puts you in someone else's shoes, and you have to experience those things as the reader. You have to experience the life of Nick Carraway through this lens, and as he is struggling with these things, you struggle with what he struggles with, but you also struggle with your reaction to his struggle, which is why, again, it's a Proustian metaphor, but why it is such a beautiful place for a reader to be. You know, that's kind of the difference between watching a movie and watching a television show and watching a TikTok and reading a book. When you're reading a book, you are responsible for creating that realm in your mind. And so there is a level of authenticity in a novel that can't be attained in someone else's understanding of a novel. Your experience of reaching out and touching someone's hand can be described by an author, but the way that you create that picture in your mind is your own experience, right? That's Descartes. Descartes says that our understanding of the world is limited by our own experiences. And I think Marcel Proust actually argues that our experience of the world means that these metaphors open up exponentially. And as our experience, even after we've experienced this book, which is why I love rereading books, changes. It changes as we change and as we gain wisdom and as we find ourselves back in the cave and out of the cave again and back in the cave and out of the cave again. And society finds itself back in the cave and out of the cave again. You know, I gotta tell you guys, you're living through one of the most unique times in history. I mean, you started your journey in school. You started your journey in life, some of you, with like 9/11, and now you're ending your journey with school with a pandemic. Like, we are in exponential times. What does that mean for you? When people talk about metaphor and people talk about love stories and people talk about what the purpose of life is, your generation, I would argue, just like the World War I generation and World War II generation, has an entirely unique perspective on what's important, what's really important. And that's why I think books are really important, because it's not someone else's experience, it's yours. And you get to take this narrative and see this story, but you get to create the reality using your experience, which makes it, again, more authentic. That's just cool. That's just really cool. So maybe the green light is greed. Maybe the green light is love that can never actually be pure. Maybe the green light is just progress. Just like just go. But if you're always going and you're never resting, can you ever appreciate it? Right? It's like the kid who gets a 98 and then comes up to me afterwards and goes, why did I lose 2 points? Don't worry about your 2 points. You got a 98. Like, no one gets a 98. It's amazing. But we can't do that because we're always looking for more. We just want more. Maybe that's not a bad thing, though, right? I hope some of you are like, that's the beauty of human nature, is that we're never satisfied, because the minute we become satisfied, throw it back to 9th grade, right? It's the land of the lotus eaters. Is once we become satisfied, we just lay around and we're like, right? So again, this is debate, right? This is argument. You're supposed to bounce against it, and that's what's amazing and beautiful and passionate about novels, as opposed to anything else. Nonfiction is great. I love nonfiction, but it's not like this. This is magic. Reading novels is magic. And I hope you are reading along with me. And take care of yourself. All right? I'll see you next time. Bye.